Welcome back to Season 5 of the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. We want you to take a moment to imagine a world where you can push a button and get your desired meal, item, or service in seconds, or an option to ask a question and immediately receive an accurate answer. These ideas may have seemed like science fiction or dreams we only saw in Star Trek, The Jetsons, the movie Her, or other TV or movie depictions of the future. However, the future is now. In our modern world, there are daily technological advancements that enter into our culture and daily lives, one of which is artificial intelligence, AI. As educators, we can often feel inundated with the newest approach to supporting learners, and any new technology or approach may elicit a response that brings us into our own moral dilemma or even flight, fight, or freeze mode. Should we let students use technology to learn? What if they take advantage or use it to do the work for them? What if they take over and our roles are no longer important? New approaches to teaching and learning in general can feel like too much, and the less we know about them, the more fearful we may become. In these situations where students of all ages start using new technologies we're not familiar with or comfortable with ourselves as educators, can trigger a chain reaction. However, today, we're going to explore some of the possibilities because we know that there are learners who benefit greatly from AI and have greater access and opportunities than ever before when they utilize it well. In this episode, we set out to show both sides of the story because the use of AI in teaching and learning is inevitable and can also serve as an important tool to create access for learners with disabilities. Today, we're joined by our friend and colleague, Dr. Luis Perez. Luis Perez is a disability and digital inclusion lead at CAST, but the views shared on this podcast episode are all his own. He holds a doctorate in special education and a master's degree in instructional technology from the University of South Florida. Luis is recognized with an International Society for Technology and Education, ISTE, Making It Happen Award in 2020. Luis has published 3 books on accessibility, mobile learning, and UDL. Mobile Learning for All by Corwin Press, Dive into UDL, ISTE, and Learning on the Go by CAST Publishing. He currently serves as the Education and Learning Strand Advisor for the Assistive Technology Industry Association, ATIA. And not only does he have so many accolades professionally, he's also a great photography and bird enthusiast, an all-around great guy. We're so glad to have you here, Luis. Thank you.
I'm really glad to be with you both, and I look forward to our conversation on this important topic.
All right, so let's dive into this. This is going to be kind of a broad topic, and I imagine a very fluid discussion because all 3 of us have, great thoughts, interests, expertise, and ideas around AI. So, Luis, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you just a big, broad question that I'm sure will be answered throughout this entire episode. But let's start with, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence?
That's a good question, and there's many different ways you can answer that question, right? Depending on your background and your perspective on it. But in general, I think most people would agree that it's basically when machines mimic human behavior. So machines, start to be involved in decision making. They start performing tasks that typically we associate with human performance. And AI has been around for a long time. It's not new, but what is new in the last couple of years was Gen AI or generative AI. And it's our ability to interact with AI through, natural language prompts where you can have a conversation with the AI and then you can get some responses back in natural language. And also the use of these very large data sets, including the internet, to be able to look for patterns in that information or in that data, and then be able to perform some tasks based on the inferences that are made from it. And there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of statistics involved, which I try to stay away from. But that's the basics of AI.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And in the introduction, I've been sitting on this for a while. I have this TED Talk in my mind of, the benefit of learning and developing executive function skills. As you know, that's my expertise. And, part of it starts with this idea of, when Jerry and I were younger in the 80s, we had the cartoon show The Jetsons, where computers are helping to predict what the family needs, or you could push a button and get what you want. And, these, again, seemed like science fiction a long time ago. But now, when you say the word Siri or Alexa, which some people confuse me for, these seem like common terms where we're asking computers and digital technologies to help us figure out, different pieces of information we're curious about, or the weather, or what to do, or how to approach something. And it seems like it's becoming more and more ubiquitous, but also there's like this hesitation around even thinking about it. And I'm so glad you said that this has been around for a while, because it has.
Yeah, and I think it's another factor with AI is that often we're using it without even realizing it, because we're using tools that often have AI embedded in them. And so explicitly, you may not be using an AI tool, but maybe you're using a spell checker or a grammar tool, right? I'm not going to mention names of tools, but there are a number of commercial, spell checking and writing assistance tools. Well, a lot of those are using AI to help you improve your writing.
Yeah.
Or in our world of assistive technology, you might be using text-to-speech. And those voices have become more accurate. They've become more natural sounding. And a lot of that is through the use of AI in the background. So that's important to recognize, is that, often you're using AI sometimes without even knowing it. And I recently was listening to a podcast where they use the words boomer or doomer when it comes to AI. And the idea is that you could be, a lot of people are falling into those two camps of like the boomers really think AI can do everything from toast your bread and put the butter on it. And then the doomers are like, it's going to replace us all. And, it's the doom of the planet. The truth is that it's somewhere in between those two extremes. And like anything, we've said the same thing in the past about radio. If you go back to the 1920s, or whenever radio came about, and you read the newspaper reports, we had the same concerns. Like there were people on either camp, or when TV came out, right? Or when the internet came out, which is more, closer to our lifetime. But with all of these technologies, people have kind of fallen into those two camps. And the truth is they're just tools, right? And it really depends on how you use them and how you use them to support specific learning strategies or teaching strategies.
Absolutely. And you and I both are huge advocates for universal design for learning. And I've been really excited to see some educators reflecting on their experience with AI and just different digital technologies in the classroom, where they're thinking about how these tools are really allowing for them to establish a framework of universal design in their learning environments, so that they are focusing more on inclusive environments. And Jared, I wonder if you can talk about the psychological side of it too, real quick.
Yeah, it seems like AI is becoming that thing that kind of has like a common ground for everybody. Like everybody could be using AI, so it's not like it doesn't make you necessarily feel like you're different for using some sort of technology like this to help yourself. I'm really curious, Luis, about it almost seems like AI is like steroids for learning. I don't know, maybe that's, I'm not sure if that's the right metaphor to use.
Can you try that again?
No, I truly think that, like, it's and I'm specifically thinking of like a chat GPT, right? Something where you're asking it to give you any answer you can possibly imagine. I was gonna before this episode, I was gonna actually do an AI search and say, AI, what are the downsides of AI? And then I was scared because I didn't want to hurt the feelings of AI, and then AI would get mad at me.
I don't think it will do that.
We're not there yet.
I'm just yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think you are bringing up an important point. When it comes to universal design for learning, historically, like a phrase that we've used is that, the average is a myth, right? The average when it comes to human performance is a myth. And there are people working in the AI field that say that that's even more true with AI. In the sense that it really calls into question, like, what's average human performance? Because now human performance, to your point, Jerry, is enhanced, right? The metaphor that I've always used in terms of like how we use technology, and it's one that I'm proud is actually holding up quite well, is that of an adjustable seat for learning, and the bicycle, right? And this is actually a quote from Steve Jobs, right? That a computer is like a bicycle for the mind, in the sense that, with a bike, you can get further than you could just by walking, right? So it's an enhancement that allows you to modify human performance in a way that allows you to do things that you couldn't do before. And so with universal design for learning, really our goal is to modify that bike or provide adjustments to that bike so that you can be in the optimal position to do what you want to do. So on a bike, you will raise the seat, you'll change the handlebars, you change your positioning so that you can get the most out of your, human capabilities, right? Your leg drive and your aerodynamic performance and all of those things, right? And so to your point, it's now like we've gone from a bike that you pedal, and with AI, it's now an electric bike. And you can choose at times to pedal, and at times you can coast. But many people think about AI more like a robot vacuum. A robot vacuum, you program it and it goes out and it cleans the house and you don't do anything. It does it by itself. And there may be situations where we want to do that with AI, right? It's a task where it's really monotonous, really routine. So we might want to program the robot to go and do its thing and then come back and report back to base. But I would argue that with AI in the context of learning, what we really want is an electric bike where you're in control, right? You have agency over what it's doing. So it is enhancing your capabilities, but it's not replacing them, right? So in the context of learning, what this means is like critical thinking, right? You're using AI, but it's not a substitute for you having AI literacy and being a critical thinker and evaluating the validity of what that AI is providing. So I feel like we have to be very careful in that we support learners in incorporating AI in ways that, really enhance what they're doing, but at the same time doesn't remove the need for, deeper thinking, deeper learning, and so on.
I absolutely love that bike metaphor. I think that's perfect, and it's a good adaptation of my steroid metaphor. But I think we're kind of saying similar things. But I really like what you said about the bicycle metaphor. So in terms of learning, because I really want to kind of get into the details about what this looks like in the classroom and how students use it. In terms of learning and like deeper learning and memory and holding things in long-term memory and understanding things contextually, how do you feel about the importance of not just doing a Google search or an AI search to get information versus using that information? And I know this is kind of a leading question because I might know what you're going to both say about this, but, in terms of learning, the use of learning is just as important as accessing the learning. So AI is access, we can say, but it's not actually, access doesn't equate to learning necessarily. Just because you access something or you can see it or be exposed to it doesn't mean that you truly can use it, understand it, contextualize it, remember it in the long term. And I think, I was talking to my students, my grad students, and I said, I think this semester I actually want to have you have an exam because I feel like we kind of moved away from exams. And I remember when I took exams, I didn't love them, but some of the stuff I really had to commit to memory long term that I really studied over the course of the semester and try to commit to memory and use it and understand it and think about it and talk about it. Like those are the things I remember. And I think there's certain foundations that you really have to remember because if you don't have foundations of certain content level, it's hard to be creative. It's hard to be able to use it in a critical thinking way because you kind of need the foundation to use it.
I think, Jerry, you're right on, right? Like AI can be sort of an entry point to learning, but there's a lot more that needs to take place. And to me, I'm going to bring it back. Alexis, this is going to make you happy. I'm going to bring it back to universal design for learning, right? One of the things that really bothers me is when people say that we're going to use AI to personalize learning. And I'll tell you, that sounds good in theory, but I'll tell you what bothers me about it. Too often, what they're saying is we're going to individualize learning. And that's different, right? We're providing you with like different activities, or we're providing you with different information that's individualized, based on, I don't know, certain inputs that you provided to the system. But personalized learning is based on a relationship between you as a learner and a mentor, or, when we think about the educators that have been really influential in our lives, rarely when I ask educators, like, who was the best teacher you ever had? Rarely do they say, the teacher that taught me the quadratic equation or
the smartest teacher.
It's usually the teacher that I had the biggest connection with.
Yeah.
The teacher that, cared and believed in me and pushed me forward and so on. So like that to me is personalized learning, right? That is the connection that is necessary for like that true personalized learning to take place, which is, teachers that bring compassion, they bring, passion to begin with, like they're passionate about their craft, they're passionate about their topic. That passion is then contagious, right? And then they're compassionate with their students, right? They give them grace when it's needed, and then they push them when that push is needed.
Yeah.
So I can think of many teachers that have performed all of those, functions for me, being compassionate when I needed it, and then being, like, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You need to get back on track. So to me, for learning to be truly personalized, that human element needs to be there. So I just want people to be careful. When you hear those words thrown around, personalized learning, ask, is it really personalized, right? Is the person there, first of all? Like, where is the person in this? Or is it just individualized? Because, you can individualize things by just having a learner sit in front of a computer all day. There have been many charter schools that have tried that. And do you think the learners love that? Sitting in front of a screen for several hours a day? No, they didn't, because that personal touch was missing from that interaction.
Well, Luis, I'm typically happy and love the things you say, but I especially, that piece of connection is so important. And I think the personalization is helping to empower learners to figure out what they need across, the landscape of their academic careers, right? Because what they need one day might be different than the next. And what they need to begin a journey of learning new content or critically thinking about something might shift and change over time. And I think the personalization does, as you say, come from that connection and relationship, because the educator, like Maria Montessori said, is that the educator and the teacher becomes the guide, and ideally the guide by their side to help them figure out and empower them to have agency around, this is what I need, this is why it's important, this is why it's helpful. And I don't know how you feel, Luis, but in that big surge where when the federal government started giving away funds for schools to have, iPads and Chromebooks and computers in their classrooms, a lot of what I heard from school districts is a lot of that technology just ended up locked away in a closet because they were afraid of how students were going to use it, right? And I kind of want us to tap into this. There's so much opportunity, and we'll talk more about how powerful AI and assistive technology can be for learners who absolutely need it. But I also want us to talk about these fears that surround anything new, right? Sometimes educators and just adults in general, they fear when young people have too much power or they know more than we do because they're afraid they might take advantage of it. And to Jerry's point, we don't want to just give something really powerful to somebody. We want to help them to understand why it's helpful. We want to help them to understand how it can empower them. So their learning journey becomes personalized because they're utilizing the tools and the resources and the guides to access what they need and to be able to dive deeply into their learning journey versus, just kind of going along with it.
Yeah. And you know what, Alexis, in terms of personalization, and you're both saying this popped in my head too, is if you learn something when you're 10, it could be very different than learning the same exact thing when you're 21 or 35 or 50 or 65, right? And so in terms of personalization, maybe that's also something to consider about when we're using AIs. Having that person who understands you and understands the context of you being you, all the factors involved in terms of how your brain has developed, in terms of the stressors you have, in terms of your life experiences, in terms of what you learned already, your background knowledge or lack of background knowledge, in terms of your life experience that you've had or not have. And so, in terms of just using AI to be a shortcut to learning things or to just accessing information, maybe that's also a missing piece in terms of personalization, is that the person matters. It's the same thing about psychotherapy. We can give psychotherapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, to literally anybody. But it's, in terms of the research says it's not necessarily always the therapy that's going to make a difference if the person gets better or not. There's also factors in terms of the therapist and also the patient, in terms of, what they bring to the table. That's a very important part of, the therapy experience. I think it also applies to learning, I'd say.
No, absolutely. And typically, the concept is that human in the middle. Yeah. That's something that's mentioned in AI circles quite a bit, that we want to make sure that we keep the human in the middle in terms of it's not just about the technology. It's about our interaction with technology within a learning ecosystem. So to your point, Alexis, about in the past, we've just kind of dropped technology in, right? So let's buy a bunch of iPads, let's buy a bunch of Chromebooks or PCs, or my favorite was interactive whiteboards. So I'm dating myself because I did technology integration back in the heyday of interactive whiteboards. And what I found is they were being used as glorified sheets that you could just go to Walmart and buy and put on the wall to project, right?
Yeah.
So it's you're paying thousands of dollars when a sheet hung on the wall could do the same thing. So we want to think about how is technology being used in a meaningful way, right? So it's not just to drop information into people or have them ask for information, but it's to actually do something with it. So in terms of AI, and a big part of AI literacy, right? We, with UDL, with Universal Design for Learning, we always say that the goal is not to make information accessible. The goal is to help you take accessible information and turn it into useful knowledge, which is a different thing, right? Mm-hmm. You take the information and then you're able to do something with it. You're able to apply it to a novel situation, or you're able to apply it to a challenge that you have, right? That you need to solve. And so that's part of that agency component that we really are pushing quite a bit with the latest update to the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. So quick plug, udlguidelines.cas.org. So check those out. Yeah. They've been recently updated with, the latest findings from the literature on learning. And so, we need to keep agency. We need to keep the human and agency in the middle, right? That people are not just using AI to just ask questions, but they're asking questions, they're getting information back, and then they're doing something with it. Whether it's solving a problem in the community or solving a personal challenge that they have that AI can help with. But again, it's not the robot that you send out into the world. It's the bicycle that you're riding and controlling and having it do things for you, but you're still in control all the way through.
Big shout out to Luis and so many other colleagues who participated in diving into the research for these new UDL Guidelines 3.0. That was an enormous amount of work that not only did you dive into the research and really make sure that everything that was stated in the new guidelines are empirically based, but you were so thoughtful about, again, like what we're talking about, keeping the learner, the human center at the core of every single decision you made as you were putting those pieces together. So thank you all for doing all that great work.
Yeah, I can echo that. And UDL is, the guidelines are great because it's an integration of different fields, right? And I love the idea of integration, and it's kind of a metaphor for what we're talking about with AI. You want to be able to integrate information into a whole rather than just being new information that you're just going to hold on to and grab onto or say, okay, now I know this. But you really want to be able to integrate things into a larger whole. That's certainly what psychotherapy is about, just for a plug for psychotherapy, right? We're always trying to integrate different aspects of ourselves and what we're learning into our psyche to help ourselves, whatever therapy you're using.
So I want to go back to the metaphor of the bicycle too, because the way we're talking about AI, we're not going to just put, if you're thinking about me, I'll use me as an example. I'm 5'3". You're not going to put me on a bike that somebody who's 6'5" would be using, right? You wouldn't just say, okay, here you go. Here's the tool. Just, use it to get where you need to go. You would say, okay, do you need to adjust your seat? Do you need to adjust the handlebars? Let me show you how you use the electric component to give you an extra boost. You would walk me through that process. And I have these conversations with students all the time, especially high school and college students who are using AI and ChatGPT all on their own because they see it as a shortcut. And our conversations really revolve around, okay, what's the purpose of using this technology and this tool? They're often hiding it from me because they don't want me to think they're cheating. And I try to normalize that. I'm like, you know what? You're asked to read a lot of really complex text right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's difficult for you.
Definitely.
I can understand why you would want to find a shortcut to be able to access this information, because it's exhausting even thinking about how much you need to get through tonight. But the conversation is more around, why is this helpful? Why is this something you're going to? What is it actually boosting and amplifying for you in this situation? We really need to help learners and all people across the lifespan to better understand how it can become a tool. And I always say, is it a toy or a tool? And now I think we can consider, is this just a Band-Aid to kind of help you get through a moment that feels like it might erupt,
or if you're confused or uncertain, you want to give up or something,
or feeling overwhelmed. Is this something that's just getting you through a moment, or something that's helping you to really dive deeply into the information, the content, and the work to be able to participate in a way that feels meaningful to you?
Yeah, and I would say that in some ways, kind of like the development of AI, I saw in some ways as inevitable. And what I mean by that is that, ever since the internet came about, we've been creating so much information, right? And we know about information overload, right? This is just a fact of life, that there's just so much information that we've created since, the birth of the internet, and wasn't that long ago, right? To more information by many, many factors than we had created from the birth of mankind or womankind to that point, right? And so in some ways we need AI in order to be able to still be able to, make sense of all this information. So I think about some of the really beneficial aspects of AI. For instance, being able to analyze large amounts of information and do things like detect that you have cancer, right? Or predict that you might be able to, come down with cancer. Things like that, where being able to take a look at large amounts of data and be able to get some insight from it. We needed tools like this, right? That could go in and look at large amounts of data and make inferences from it and provide us with those insights in a way that we can better understand. So I see it as a necessity in the way that, you need a tool to kind of sift through all the information that we have at our fingertips these days. But at the same time, it's not one without, things that we need to be cautious about.
I kind of want to tap into and talk about both sides of like even where the information is coming from, right? Because even though there's so much information on the internet, it's being produced by humans, right? So when AI does its work to navigate and sift through all the information that's accessible through the internet, sometimes it's not pulling from like every possible perspective. So I just want to raise that as a potential concern too. And these are other points of conversations I have with my students that, it might give you a starting point to know where to, enter the conversation, but it's not going to give you everything. And Luis, I wonder if you can talk a little bit to that too.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up to that is, could it be biased or, but not only can it be biased, but can it almost lead us, almost like in therapy, like I can ask a question, I'm like, oh, that was a leading question. I'm kind of leading them to think a certain way, which I shouldn't do, right? So, is it possible that AI is kind of leading us in a direction and then it kind of influences the directions that we take, to Alexis's point, if it's not considering all different, ways of thinking?
Well, it definitely is an issue, bias and the fact that a lot of the inferences are not made from representative data samples. And that just has to do, like you said, Alexis, who's putting together the AI, right? Who's at the table in terms of developing the AI? That's something that, I'm really passionate about, is making sure that computer science departments are more diverse. Software development teams are more diverse. That's just going to have a whole bunch of different benefits, right? There's a saying that inclusion promotes innovation.
Yes.
And so when we include more perspectives, we include more different ways of looking at problems and challenges, we actually end up with better solutions. So I think to create the best AI that we can, we have to have women be part of those development teams. We have to have people with disabilities. We have to have people of color. Because
I was even thinking people who aren't digital natives too, perhaps can share their perspective.
Absolutely. You could have anthropologists be part of that conversation. You should have anthropologists. You should have liberal arts people. You should have ethicists. So that you're thinking about the ethical implications. You're thinking about all these things that we're talking about. But in many cases, I think the challenge, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but when I think about AI, it's sort of like the technology of the present and the future, but it's often using data from the past.
Great point.
And that's where the point of tension is, right? So we're making decisions that have an impact in the present. We're thinking about the future potential of these tools, but a lot of the insights are based on data from the past, and that data hasn't always been representative.
Wow.
So what I would say is for learners to always take it as a first draft.
Yeah.
And to always assume that there's going to be bias in it because it's being generated in a biased society. So it's not separate from our society. Just like when we find artifacts from history from the past, right? They're evidence of what was happening in that society. And so AI is going to be our artifacts in the future.
Yeah, and I always say that bias often comes from that which we don't know. That's why education is so important. And that's why just keeping things in silos, or that information sometimes does come from a silo. It's just so important to educate learners of all ages, all of us, for humanity's sake, to understand that it's never just one thing, and we need to broaden our perspective. And again, when I think of AI, at least, it always is like a stepping stone, especially from an executive function perspective, that it can help us synthesize, prioritize, and organize some of the information that's out there to figure out what we do with it next, rather than it being everything.
Yeah, and what I would say is, people have been trying to tackle this issue of bias in AI, but I'm adamant that they're asking the wrong question. The question is not how do we mitigate bias in AI, is how do we mitigate bias in society? Like you mentioned the word Band-Aid and just a few minutes ago. If you're trying to address bias in a data set being used by AI, that's a Band-Aid. You're still using the AI in like a biased environment.
Yeah.
So you can't separate it from like larger efforts to like address bias in society, address representation, right? Representation matters. So again, going back to who's being involved in the development of AI, who's making decisions about it. And so we as consumers play a role in this here. And the role that we play is we can be, whenever decisions are being made about AI, we can ask questions like, hey, tech companies are already required in many cases to release information about who's part of their boards, who's part of the leadership team, how diverse is that leadership team. We should be asking the same thing about AI companies. Like, who's on your board? Who's part of your leadership team? What's the makeup of your workforce if you're developing AI? Things like that really have an impact on representation and bias beyond the technology, right? But really impact the ecosystem in which it is being developed and deployed.
Yeah. And you're saying like AI is based on past information, and part of therapy, I'm making a metaphor here, is to use the past to understand patterns, but also to be present, because every present moment is unfolding, it's new, and to be able to understand the present and to not just base yourself on the past, but also to be open to the present. In this similar light, in terms of bias, like, I think sometimes it's hard when we're using AIs because we want certainty. And like so much of the kids growing up now, they just want certainty. They just want answers. They just want to know. And I don't blame them for that. Like, part of anxiety is not having certainty. So you look for certainty to feel less anxious. And I'm afraid that, I keep saying I'm afraid. I'm looking at the potential downside of kind of using AI to just get certainty when sometimes, as we were saying, answers are not so concrete. They're not so black and white, where sometimes multiple things could be true at the same time, rather than one side arguing their side, the other side arguing their side. Is that, as this conversation kind of elucidates that, is that multiple things could be true within a larger context at the same time. And that's maybe something that could be lost. And that actually, that type of thinking happens in dialogue, where you can conversate with people, talk to people, understand different perspectives, understand common ground, understand differences, and be able to acknowledge, okay, this is true, and that's also true at the same time. And that type of dialogue may not happen when you're just kind of, running to AI to get answers. I'm not sure. Maybe AI will adapt. Well, maybe AI will adapt to be able to help with that. But that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to oversimplify. Like, AI is also generating data of the present, so it's not as simple as I made it seem. But in general, right, these large data sets, a good portion of them are from historical data, right? But the current data leads to some other issues that we need to be aware of, which is something called hallucinations. So hallucination in AI is when it sounds good, but it's completely inaccurate.
Wow, interesting.
And I'll give you an example, because this is one way that I use AI, and just from experience, I've learned like some of the limitations. So I do a lot of research, right? And often with research, I have to put together a bibliography. And if you try to do that with AI, there will be authors who don't exist.
Yeah, I've heard that.
There will be papers that have never been written.
Wow.
There will be journals that were never created.
Wow.
But one thing that I found it to be really good at is, if I have my bibliography, I have a love-hate relationship with APA style, right? With getting the periods in the right place and the right formatting. But if I have an existing bibliography and I ask AI, like, please format this in APA style. It does an amazing job.
That's nice. Yeah,
of
that's
doing
helpful.
that because with APA, like you're running a set of rules, right? And so I found that that's like really effective, efficient. It saves me a ton of time. But just like saying create a bibliography for me, that's when like the issues of those hallucinations of, oh, sounds good. The journal of so-and-so from, but then you do a search and you find that it doesn't actually exist. So we need to be aware of, I think those are the two big challenges. One is bias. And there's a human component to that. Like it's not just an information challenge, it's a human challenge of like addressing bias and representation. And then the other one is hallucinations. And at some point, I think, with technology, we usually ask for metrics. We want metrics, right? Like with captioning, right? You wouldn't say, hey, it's 80% accurate. That's good enough. Go and be part. I think you were part of a concert recently that had a sign language interpreter. So that brought to mind this idea to me, right? So like you wouldn't say, hey, it's 80% accurate. That should be good enough. The other 20 words or 20%, just kind of make it up.
Was that a love song or a heartbreak song? I guess we'll never know. That 20% was missing.
So it's the same with AI. Like for people to like really have a trusting relationship with it, these companies need to be more transparent.
Yeah.
Just full stop. They need to be more transparent about like the accuracy levels. There needs to be some metrics at some point that we can then use to judge one company from the other. So that's something that I really am in favor of. It's like, in addition to like the sort of like transparency in terms of who makes up these companies and what their backgrounds are, because that's important. It's like some metrics about their performance. Because right now we're just assuming that they work.
Yeah.
In many cases, they don't.
And I'm thinking about the accuracy and inaccuracy. And I'm thinking of some of the students I've worked with who have either a learning disability or ADHD and are trying to just, get things done and kind of hang with what they're asked to do. And sometimes they're making up articles to have enough references and citations in their papers. So with or without AI, we want to help to educate learners, especially who are figuring out how to learn best for themselves, how to navigate situations, how to be able to gain accurate information that they can use in the things that they're doing.
Absolutely. And I mean, we are trying to give you sort of, both sides. I'm kind of a boomer. I'm not quite in that generation age-wise, but I'm a boomer in the sense that I do see potential, right? I do see potential in the assistive space for AI. So I'll give you an example. Audio description. So audio description, for those that are not familiar, when you have a video, if there's somebody who's blind and who's not able to see what's in the video, you have to describe what's happening so that they get the same or equivalent experience, right? And they get the same meaning. And so that's been really difficult in the past because you have to hire voice talent that then goes into a studio like the one you're recording in right now, right? And that takes time and so on. But there are companies out there that are trying to scale this up using AI. Using synthesized speech and using AI to generate transcripts on the fly that then can analyze the video and insert the descriptions in specific points. So that's a great use of AI where like it's really going to have a huge impact because there are so many videos out there that are not accessible, which means that our individuals who are blind are not able to get that information. And so there's so much potential there. But at the same time, I have to be a doomer sometimes. Like there are issues related to bias and issues related to accuracy and transparency that we still need to address if we're going to get the most benefit So going back to the bike metaphor, is like we're putting it together while we're riding it.
Yeah.
So at times it may be a little wobbly. At times we may hit some bumps on the road, but that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile, right? Trying to use it and trying to get the most out of it. So I hope that we provided sort of a balanced perspective on it. Don't turn away from it, right? I don't know that that's a choice at this point. It is part of our lives, right? It's basically infused into our lives, but at the same time, approach it critically, and think about the limitations as well as the benefits.
Most definitely. Jerry always talks about seeing both sides, and I'm really glad that we engaged in this conversation, and so many great, bubbles and discussion points came up along the way. And by no means is this exhaustive in thinking about all of the potential cautions and benefits of using AI, but really it is a great starting point to think a little bit differently about how AI can be beneficial. We talked broadly about how it's used in life, because I think I see pretty much every environment you walk into as a potential learning environment. Like, I'm here in the studio right now, and just looking around using my senses, I'm noticing new things that I'm not familiar with that I'm learning from just by interacting with it. So, we talked about AI from this broad perspective of how it can help pretty much everyone, but I really want us to be more mindful about how it creates greater learning opportunities and access for individuals who have a specific disability, that they need to be able to gain access, that we can think from more of an inclusive, holistic, humanistic perspective of how this can be beneficial, and how we have open conversations about our fears and the cautions along the way. Because like motorized bikes that sometimes will drive along with cars, they're not quite cars. There might be different rules and different signals and different cautions that they need to be mindful of too as they go along. And as you say, Luis, this is a learning process. We need to figure out how to better integrate all of this into our educational landscape. But hopefully this conversation diffused some of the fears of the educators and parents and students alike that are out there listening. And we're so grateful for the conversation. And I'm sure you'll be back on the show at some point, and we'll continue. But again, thank you always for your friendship, collegial input on everything. You are like my tech guru. I learned so much from you just being a part of my life. And thank you for all your expertise you share with both of us in our worlds and in the show.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the show again, and always happy to contribute to these conversations. But I always like to leave people with something practical that they can try out. So recently I discovered this tool called Google's Notebook LM for language model, and it is amazing. And I think it would be really helpful for some of the people that you work with, because what happens is you can upload a document, like let's say a PDF document. And you could take a Word document and export it to PDF if you need to, but you upload the document, and then it gives you all kinds of things about that document. So for instance, it'll give you a summary. It will give you an outline. It can generate an FAQ from it. It can generate questions so that you can use those questions to test yourself on how well you understand the content.
Wow.
But the most amazing thing about it is that it generates a podcast for you.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Wait, what?
So recently,
what?
You should both try this out, because it will it'll blow your mind. So I uploaded a paper that I co-published with a colleague of mine, Sam Johnston. We published a paper on universal design for learning and intelligence, focusing on collective intelligence. And, it's a pretty meaty topic and a pretty meaty document in terms of the content. But we uploaded the document to Notebook LM, and it created a 9-minute podcast. And and it sounds like an NPR interview. They call it a deep dive. And it's basically two people basically having a conversation. Of course, these two people don't exist.
Wow.
But they have a conversation about your paper, and you end up with a 7 to 10 minute podcast that you can then listen to on the way to work or on the way to school. And I was very impressed by how accurate and concise it was. Because again, I'm feeding it the information, right? I'm limiting it to that document and the ideas in that document. So it's free for now. It's kind of a project, right? This is the Google way of putting something out and getting you to be the beta tester. And so it's free, but I would encourage people to give it a shot because, again, in the spirit of UDL, Universal Design for Learning, it's something you can use to, really take dense information and convert it into other formats, or at least get different representations of that information, like an outline, an executive summary, and so on.
And this will be the last ReidConnect-Ed podcast.
I was just thinking we should run our podcast through it to synthesize it into short little chunks of information.
Wow.
No, I wouldn't go that far, Jerry, because they don't have your sense of humor. They don't have your jokes, good or bad jokes. I don't think they can play the guitar as well as you can. So they may have the voice quality, but not the guitar and the sense of humor and personality that you have, and Alexis as well.
You're very kind. That's amazing. And in fact, that's what a lot of my students, they use AI primarily to kind of synthesize information and prioritize where to start. Because sometimes, long text, as I mentioned before, just becomes so overwhelming that they don't know how to begin. And then they end up just either not reading and not engaging with the text, or just spending so much time reading and rereading, listening and re-listening. And it's really difficult for them to synthesize that information. So that's an amazing tool. See what I mean, listeners? Luis has all of the great tips. And he and I are actually working on a piece together that will share a few more really practical ideas of how AI can help both educators from a standpoint of being a sounding board to come up with more creative lesson planning, to consider accessibility as you are planning, and from a learner's perspective, to be able to organize and really bolster executive function skills through using AI to help you get started.
Luis, this is a real quick random tangent, but it just popped in my head. You're emphasizing the importance of synthesizing a lot of complex information. Like your example was like, there's so much complex information. How are we ever going to even grasp it? Or Alexis said, how are we going to even get started? It reminds me of 2008 when the housing crisis happened. If you watch the movie The Big Short, as far as I understand, the whole issue is that nobody actually understood the metrics that were being used. Only
Absolutely.
A small percentage of people actually understood it. And I guess we're making money off of it because nobody else actually understood what was happening and how it was about to crash. So I guess, maybe the benefits of AI could be that it helps more people to understand very complex things. Again, of course, as long as it's not biased or leading us in a certain direction, that's intentional. Obviously, that would be the bad part of it. But certainly, think of that.
I'm glad you brought that up because, I some listeners may not know this. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm actually have a background in political science. So I really think about things like that economic crisis, right, in context, and the issue, when it relates to UDL and kind of stretch. I'm going to make a stretch here, but it does relate to UDL because the issue with that crisis was not intelligence. It was ethics. In the sense that these people, like you said, Jerry, they came up with really complex instruments. Most of them came from the people that created these instruments came from some of our best schools in the land, right? And they're really intelligent people, and they came up with these complex instruments on purpose. So that, again, there was no transparency. Are you seeing some parallels?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Complex, opaque, right? Not transparent.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, they did this without thinking about the impact on other people, right? And the implications. Or maybe they knew the implications, but greed and, again, comes back to ethics. Those things were not there. And so we end up with a situation where lots of people lost their homes and our economy almost tanked, right? So similarly with AI, ethics has to be part of the conversation. Responsible use, social justice. All of those things need to be part of the conversation, or else we can go down roads that, looking back, we may wish that we hadn't gone down those roads. So anyway, I'll get down from my soapbox. You get me really going on this, because now you're tapping into my political science background.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for bouncing off my random thought that now AI is going to figure out why I had that random thought in the context of our conversation. It's going to be able to predict why I'll have that thought again in the future.
Gotta love it.
Thank you both for allowing me to be part of this conversation and being sharing with your audience, and keep up the great work, and really appreciate you both.
Yeah, we appreciate you so much, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis.
Take care.
Yeah,
Talk
you
to
too.
soon.
See you,
Be
brother.
careful. We'll
Thank
talk
you.
to you soon. Thanks, Luis.
Thanks for tuning in to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. Please remember that this is a podcast intended to educate and share ideas, but it is not a substitute for professional care that may be beneficial to you at different points of your life. If you are in need of support, please contact your primary care physician, local hospital, educational institution, or support staff at your place of employment to seek out referrals for what may be most helpful for you. Ideas shared here have been shaped by many years of training, incredible mentors, research, theory, evidence-based practices, and our work with individuals over the years, but it's not intended to represent opinions of those we work with or who we are affiliated with. The ReidConnect-Ed Podcast is hosted by siblings Alexis Reid and Dr. Gerald Reid. Original music is written and recorded by Gerald Reid. Editing and recording was done by CyberSound Studios. If you want to follow along on this journey with us, the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks each season. So please subscribe for updates and notifications. Feel free to also follow us on Instagram at ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. That's ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, and Twitter at ReidConnect-Ed. We are grateful for you joining us and look forward to future episodes. In the meanwhile, be curious, be open, and be well.